the first thing that I want to point out is that as you've all discovered, the prefab of the rollerball that we have, the script that's attached to it has its own jump. We're going to eliminate that by zeroing out the jump value. Now, before we do this, you'll notice that my rollerball is not blue. It's not a prefab. We talked a little bit about why that is last week, but I do want to remind you that if your rollerball is blue in the hierarchy, that means that it's referencing a prefab object. We'll talk about the implications of that. You'll want to right-click on the object and make sure I don't have the option because it's no longer a prefab. Let me just make a really quick and dirty prefab here so that we can see this. If yours is blue, so it has a blue icon, make sure that you right-click on it and unpack prefab completely. That's gonna make life a little bit easier. It's no longer blue. I'm gonna delete this demo object. So just want to point out that my rollerball is no longer blue. So it's not referencing it's no longer referencing a library object. With my rollerball selected, I'm going to scroll down and you'll see that there's a ball script. And down at the bottom of the ball script, it says jump power. And I'm just going to zero that out. So that effectively renders the Unity jump useless. And we're going to build our own mechanic around this. In fact, it would be most appropriate to kind of build our own rig based on exactly how we want our camera to work and follow our sphere. It's a little outside the scope of this project, so we're just kind of fast tracking it with what Unity is providing. But just know that we could not just build our own jump, but we could build our whole control system from the ground up. So I've zeroed out our jump, and just to be thorough, I'm going to hit the play button and make sure I in fact can't jump. I can't, that's what I want, so I'm going to toggle the play button. I'm going to build my own jump mechanic, and then we'll kind of layer in some things. Normally I draw something out on the board and we kind of talk about it and brainstorm, but I'm just going to cut right to the chase so we can get this rolling. And with my rollerball selected, I'm going to add a state machine. And this state machine is going to control the jump. And so I'm just going to add idle into the equation. So this is when we're sitting waiting for some user feedback. For now, what I'm going to do is add the space bar as my jump. We can change it to mouse click and anything else that we want. In fact, we can have multiple inputs causing the same jump. But for the sake of this demo, I'm going to use the space bar. So I'm going to find the input category. And I'm going to do a get button down. So, the idea of when we're dealing with inputs, not get button down, I'm going to do a get key down. I'm fast forwarding. We want to do a get key down. It's an explicit call to a key on the keyboard. So I'm just going to search for a key. I can change it later. I could have multiple keys. I'm going to listen for space. And if I get space, I want to follow a transition event. Now, the previous demo, I went to events and I built a next event. I'll do it a little bit different this time. I'm just going to create a new event. I like to use this nice generic next event when it's just a linear transition around a state machine. I always use next. I don't have to think about what it is and what it's doing. If there's not multiple transitions from one state, next usually does the trick. So if we get a key press, we're going to follow next. I'm going to transition. I'm going to hold down the command key, or I'm just going to right click and add a state and wire it over here. This is going to be our jump state. Okay. Now, we could use a finished state, okay, which is what I'm going to use now. Remember, this is a unique state that we could end up breaking if we layer in some actions that are incompatible with it. If I right click and add transition, there's this custom finished event, which just simply means that whatever's on the state, when it's done running, exit through the finished state. So this is a really simple way to say do whatever's on that state and then follow the finished transition out of that state. This is a testable logical loop here. We're listening for the get key down space. If we get it, we should end up in jump. It doesn't do anything yet, but I can watch the state machine flip around every time I hit the space bar. So it's just a basic toggle. Okay, so I can see when I hit the space bar, it advances. Okay, so I'm going to toggle the play button. I'm going to add a little bit of a layer of complexity here. I'm going to scroll down, and on my jump state, I'm going to go find the physics category, and I'm going to add force. I'll double click. We're going to add force to the owner. This is the rollerball object. We want to add force along its y-axis. That would be the up axis. So I'm going to take the y value, and while I'm exploring this concept, I'm just going to use a fixed value, a static value. So I'm going to hit the equal sign. I don't know what value I need here. I don't know if it needs to be 1,000, 50, 2, I don't know. So I'm going to start off with something that kind of feels about right. We'll start with 50. I'm not going to do every frame. We'll explore that in just a moment. Our world space is based on, the world space is based on this widget up here, which means that it's not taking into account its own axis, which would be a bad thing in this case because our axis is always tumbling. And if we say jump along the y-axis according to our own axis, we could be pointing down, we hit jump, it doesn't do anything. So this is essential that we're using the y-axis in the world space. I'm going to hit the play button and just to test my jump to get off the ground. So I'm going to tap the space bar, and as you can see, nothing's happened really. There's actually a little bit of a blip. So I'm just going to go back over here, and I'm going to bump this up to 200, and I'll hit the play button again. That feels a little better. Okay, my camera isn't really allowing me to, see this exactly the way that I want to. So I'm not super psyched about this script, but I'm just gonna figure out where my mouse rotator is and see if I can take the Y value down to like maybe half or a little bit less than half to get more of a perspective view. That didn't do what I wanted it to do. Oh, that was my rotation range, that's why. So I think last week, I believe when we were tinkering with this, the key was to take the main camera and move it closer to the ground. I think that'll change my perspective. I don't remember. I've actually never used this script before. Yeah, that's good. So I can now test. Okay, so actually that jump is way lower than I want it to be. So we have a couple of different options. When we're jumping, we're applying an instant force. Now I'm going to break this just so that we can see this. Here's my rollerball. We're adding force for only one frame. So this is actually a tremendous amount of force, these 200 units of force. But it's only happening for one frame. Okay? I can break this pretty badly. If I say every frame, two things are going to happen. One, it's going to continuously add force. It's going to be cumulative. And this finished event is never going to be satisfied. Because we're doing this every frame, that means that we never exit that transition. So the result here is that, we break this thing. We launch it into the air, it's still flying upwards. Okay, so not what I want to do. I don't want that every frame, but I do want to bump this up. So I'm going to keep playing with this value and increasing the Y value to get a jump that I think should work the way that I want it to. A little too high, but somewhere between 200 and 500. So I'm going to kick that back down to probably 300. The other thing that we can take into account is that we have drag and we have mass. We have all these values. The less mass that we have, the less force it takes to act upon it. So we can tinker those values. Well, it's really snowing outside. Have to hear ourselves a little extra time to get home. So now we have our own jump. This was the goal. We want to jump. We want to control our jump. And in a moment, we're going to determine whether we can or cannot jump based on whether we picked up a power-up object. And we'll do that here in a moment. First thing I need to do is I got to get rid of this finish transition. So I'm going to right-click on it, and I'm going to delete transition. Okay. I'll go over to my actions, and I can look in the time category, or, oops, didn't want to do random wait. I'll find wait, and I'm going to borrow the same next event that I used in the first state, and I'll cheat and add it here and wire it back. And I'm going to do a real-time count. I'm going to say 2 seconds, even though, I'll probably shorten it a little bit, but that's a quick fix. Okay, I can't mash the space bar. Now 2 seconds is actually too long, right? Because I'm just mashing the space bar, trying to get it to jump right away. So this is a pretty clumsy way, but it's going to work, it's going to be effective. I'll reduce that to 1.5 seconds.
Are we gonna be able to? Are you gonna show us the appropriate way soon?
Yeah. We'll talk about it right now, and then we'll come back and clean it up. The most appropriate way, I'll layer it in here in a few moments.
Did I miss anything?
Yeah.
I mean, besides the jump thing, besides having the
Jump. You missed a jump.
And besides that,
I don't know. We're gonna have to review the videos and find out. I wasn't paying attention to when you left. Saw that you weren't there. Don't take notes. Didn't timestamp it and say Eric's gonna left. Let me make some notes about what Eric's missing. So, let's do this. Right now we're jumping. I want to build the ability to control a switch as to whether we're allowing the player to jump or whether we're not allowing the player to jump. Now, in this case, we are going to use a global variable because we want other objects to be able to flip this on and flip this off, okay? And we're going to talk about a new kind of variable, which is a bool. And we've encountered a bool over and over in a lot of different places. And a bool is anytime we see a check mark. A bool is a conditional statement, a conditional variable. It's either on or off. It's true or it's false. Okay, right now my sphere collider is true. It's on. And it's checked. Okay, those are three different interpretations. They all mean the same thing. Now my sphere collider is off, it's false, or it's unchecked. Okay? What I'm going to do is I'm going to add a state. And I'm going to put this state in between idle and jump. This state is going to be called jump check. It's going to check to see if we're allowed to jump. When we hit the jump button, we're going to pass it to jump check and say, yes, we can jump, or no, we can't jump. There's going to be two conditions, two transition events that transition out of this. If we can't jump, we're going to loop right back to idle and forget it ever happened. If we can jump, we're going to pass it over to jump just like we did before. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to set it to, yes, we can jump, and we're going to have the same functionality we had before. It's just going to have an extra state in between. Our jump check is going to be based on a bool check, a little checkbox to say, yes, we can or cannot jump. So I'm looking at a specific kind of variable. I'm going to type in bool, B-O-O-L, and what I want to do is do a bool check, or a bool test, excuse me. We can find that in the logic category. I'm going to double click, and you can see that the action spells out we have a bool. If it's true, we can follow one transition, and if it's false, we follow another. Okay? So I'm going to build my transition events first. Now this is at the point, now that we're getting multiple transition events out of a state, this is the place where it's going to be a little bit easier and a little bit faster to go to events and build these out manually. But if you want to stay in the comfort zone where Playmaker provides you this framework where you click on the drop-down menu and say new event, you can do that. I'm going to do this under the events tab. I always capitalize my events, mainly because Playmaker does, and so I'm going to make a can jump and hit return, and I'm going to make a can't jump. Now I'm leaving off the apostrophe of the can't, just because I don't know if that's going to, that's not an alphanumeric number, and therefore it might throw a wrench in the works. I don't think it will in the as far as states are concerned, but we can and we cannot jump. Those are two different transition events. I'm going to go over to my jump check, and I'm going to say if it's true, we can jump. And if it's false, we can't jump. Okay, so we can and we can't. We'll come back and set the condition here in a moment. I'm going to right click and I'm going to add these two transitions. So we have a can jump. We know we follow the can jump if our bool is true. So I want to send it over to jump. Our can't jump, we're going to wire that right back to idle. And now I'm just going to satisfy this bool. This is going to be a global variable. Ultimately, we'll get to the point where we're creating non-global bools and we're identifying the game object and pulling data from it. But this is still going to be the easiest way because multiple objects are talking to it. I'm simply going to say, I'm going to call this player can jump. So it's a positive statement. The player can jump. We can call it player jump if you want, but that's a little misleading because, is the player jump logic over here? This is the player can jump, and it's a bool. I'm going to hit return or create. I'll say OK. So does anybody remember how to get to global variables in order to test this or set this? If I go to variables, I see that I have a player can jump. It's being used one time. Does anybody remember how we got to global variables? The only reason I want to do this one time is just to manually test this. By default, our variable is set to false. So what's the logic? What's going to happen here? Let's walk through this. Press the space bar. If we get the space bar, we're going to follow the next transition. We end up down here. What's going to happen from here? It's going to, can't jump is set to false. So, or player can jump is set to false. So it's going to follow the can't jump transition event, which is going to send us back to the beginning. So if this is set up properly, every time I hit the space bar, it's going to ping pong back and forth between these two states. This is testable, right? It's doing exactly what we want it to do. It can't jump. Okay, but I actually want it to jump. And so what I need to do is I need to go find this variable, this player can jump, and I want to set it manually to true for now. Well, I can find that under Playmaker, Editor Windows, Global Variables. It's very few times are we going to need to jump into global variables once we, track what we're doing, but I want to manually switch this. So I'm going to select player can jump. The value right now is set to false. It's unchecked. It's a little, if you're not used to looking at this, this is the value. It's now true. Okay? I might even park this window temporarily in case so I can jump back and forth quickly, and that's another window I had to deal with. It's very rare that I'll look at it. But right now you can see that my can jump is set to true. This is testable. So if I have this wired properly, when I hit the space bar, we should jump. Okay, so this is a simple switch in that if I go to global variables and I select this, if I turn that off, I can no longer jump. On, off. Okay? So currently, it's set to false, it's unchecked, which is what we want. So I cannot jump. So let's try to set up that scenario.
Oh, you want it on false?
I want to set the bool value when I bump in. So when I get my collision event and I follow my next transition, we should flip on our bool. So I'm going from not being able to jump to being able to jump. This is testable. It's not refined. It's not super clean right now. The cube doesn't go away. It doesn't even look like, maybe I want a little spring icon instead of a cube. But again, I'm not getting so hung up on every feature of the design. What I'm interested in right now is the mechanic. I'm testing it. Spacebar doesn't do anything. I'm going to bump into that, and now I can jump. Okay? I can clean this thing up by saying, if we unlock the jump, I'm going to delete this cube. Maybe we render some text on screen that says, yeehaw, you can jump. Okay, but that's the basic concept. I'll clean this up by simply destroy self. I'm going to make sure that destroy self is happening after this bool is set. We got an order of operation if we're destroying before we set the bool, because it happens from the top down. Okay, so I'll hit the play button. I can jump. Okay.